Well, we made it to the final panel number 5 today. And we are going to, as we have been doing for the first 4 panels, we are going to allow um, each presenter to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their research and what it is that they're doing. And first up is Brother Marco McNeil. And you go ahead on and you present on Porch Theology today.
Sure. Thank you for that, for allowing me to be here, Dr. Johnson. I greatly appreciate that. I do have some slides that I want to share
Uh-huh.
to kind of guide us through this discussion. I do want to start off and say that this did not just come out of thin air. I am a trained community organizer with the Gamaliel Network. The Gamaliel Network is the same network that trained Barack Obama in the late 80s. And while in Detroit at our Race and Power Institute, I had the pleasure of hearing Dr. John Powell of the Othering and Belonging Institute at UC Berkeley. And I was listening to his discussion, and then I bought his book. And most scholars, we want to know where you got this information from. Where did this come from? It was birthed out of something. And then it led me to Robert Putnam, who wrote a book, I believe it was 20 or 25 years ago this year, called Bowling Alone. And Putnam said something that kind of struck me. And he said that he uses the analogy of bowling alleys and bowling leagues as a source of community. And what I kept hearing in the atmosphere was, we really lost community when we went from the porch to the patio, meaning that when you ride down your street, everybody was outside on the front porch. Now, when you go home, most people go into their enclosed garage that's attached to their house. And if they do go outside, it's to their back patio. Nobody really communicates with the community anymore or our neighbors anymore. So it led me to think, what would it look like if we decided to go from patio back to the porch? And that led through a series of conversations. And one of them is a lecture that I did in Philadelphia for their ministerial alliance there. And I titled it Porch Theology. And all of this has been birthed from that. In Porch Theology, it's a living, breathing framework that emerges not from the sacred places of our seminaries or academic journals, but it's the rhythm of everyday life that is rooted in communal spaces of Black and Brown people in immigrant neighborhoods. It articulates a theology that is lived, felt, and known. So, what I'll talk about is some of the pillars of porch theology that will kind of ground my time here with us today. So it's not a reactionary traditional theology, but it is a reclaiming of theological methods rooted in embodied wisdom and sacred presence. And, and the 5 pillars of porch theology are as follows. Number 1, sacred dialogue in common spaces. 2, embodied wisdom and intergenerational exchange. 3, theological proximity over abstraction. And 4, a communal sense of God's movement. And 5, a theology of presence. I won't go into full detail of all 5, but I will read a little bit of each of them. So porch theology is not just a place, it's a threshold, a liminal zone where laughter echoes, tears fall without shame, the questions of life, death, faith, and survival find an filtered voice. In many African American neighborhoods, the porch serves as a place where theology is not just proclaimed, but it is discovered. Um, yes, it's a place where it's not just proclaimed; it is discovered. It is a place where it honors the sacred dialogue. It reclaims informational spaces, such as site exploration. It encounters both men, women, children, and those alike. that want to come and have a conversation that surrounds theological conversation. On the porch is where people name their worries, they tell their stories, they have their questions, they lament, and they share their testimonies. It's a place where elders speak to the old ways, the old days, where the children continue to chase fireflies and neighborhoods pause long enough, excuse me, to recognize the divine in each other's presence. The porch is not just a place, but it is a sacred ground where we all hold community and relationship with each other. One of the places where we see that in the Bible is not a porch, but it's a well. In John chapter 4, Jesus has this conversation with the Samaritan woman who has been basically shunned from her community. She has to go and draw water at an inopportune time, but she has a life-changing encounter there. Now, if you factor in the conversation of the well, if you think about it as a porch, she went and changed her entire community with a few words. Come see a man. That conversation changed her whole community. And how many conversations have we had on the porch that has lasted with us, is stuck with us throughout the ages, and now here we are attempting to change our community, change our friend circles, and everything that surrounds us. Number two is an embodied wisdom and intergenerational exchange. Porch theology refuses the notion that wisdom only flows from credentialed voices. Instead, it elevates the knowledge of those grandmother's prayers, the uncle's warnings, children's hopes, and a community's memory of struggle. These voices become our sacred texts. In this theology, lived experience becomes authoritative. It is learned from the people who would rather see a sermon than to hear one any day. To embrace the body's wisdom is to recognize that theology happens through the body. It happens in the way the elder sits, in the way she tells her stories. It happens in the deep rhythmic voice of a father's tone when he recounts migration. It also embodies the tears of mothers who have lost childs. This theology is one that is kinesthetic and it is alive. Then there is theological proximity over abstraction. Porch theology is suspicious of theological abstraction. It does not begin with creeds or councils, but it begins with cries and questions. These are not signs of weak faith. These are the very context in which theology becomes real. It affirms that the deepest theology is not often formed in seminaries, but it is formed in suffering. Rather than beginning with systemic categories, Porch theology begins and ends with people, with parents asking the questions, how are they going to put food on the table? With youth questioning God after losing another friend to gun violence, with elders wondering if the promises of Scripture still apply when their community is overlooked and underserved. Number four, it is a communal sense of God's movement. In traditional theology, we know that divine action is often defined through miracles and metaphysical intervention. Porch theology expands the lens a little bit more. It sees God's movement in survival, resilience, and mutual aid through cooking, through singing, and through protecting one another. It names as sacred what others might overlook. And while some may seek the task as mundane, in African American culture, we see the divine through it all. Number five, and lastly, theology of presence. In the end, porch theology is not about doing something to others, it's about being with them. It's about being in community. It's about resisting saviorism and paternalism, but the porch does not demand solutions, it demands presence. It is an embodied resilience at the speed and the scale and the spectacle of performative ministry. To do ministry on the porch is to show up, is to sit in silence, is to drink sweet tea and let time do its work. It echoes Jesus' ministry of presence, his refusal to rush past the bleeding woman, his choice to stay at Zacchaeus' house, his post-resurrection fish breakfast with Peter, and his midnight meeting with Nicodemus in John 3. Each of these moments reminds us that presence always precedes proclamation. Now, there's towards a practice of porch theology. It is more than a metaphor. It is and should be a model of ministry, a hermeneutic of survival, and a liturgy of life. It calls pastors and faith leaders and theologians and organizers and neighbors to listen deeply to those who are on the margins, honor the stories of the sacred text, preach with proximity and not detachment, organize in love and not ego, but most of all, show up and stay present. This porch theology treats the porch as holy ground. And like Moses before the burning bush, those who step onto it must remove their shoes, open their ears, and listen. Thank you.
All right. All right. Thank you. Thank you. And next up, my good friend Cathryn Stout. Come on, Cathryn. How you doing?
Don't put me after that now. Come
How
on.
you doing today?
That's just not fair. Um, what happens when porch theology goes transnational or international? How about that as a bridge? All right.
Right.
I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to warn you, my slides are extra. Everything I do is extra. I've learned to accept that about myself. All right. So just accept these extra slides here. All righty. And we're going to put it in this one here. All righty. So good afternoon, and thank you to Dr. Marco for that wonderful porch theology session for getting us started. And if you can make the bridge with me, how about we take this porch theology transnational or international? I want to thank Dr. Johnson for having me. Thank you to the Johnsonian squad. Is that what I saw in the chat? All right. Thank you for letting me invade your space today. Um, I want to take you back to not the porch, but to 1984 Cuba, 1984 Havana. Now, I promise this isn't going to be a dry recount of Cold War politics, though we will have revolutionaries, diplomats, and some church drama. Instead, I'd like to tell you about what I think is one of the most unlikely church services in modern history, where a cigar smoking atheist revolutionary found himself in a Methodist pew listening to a Baptist preacher. I am Cathryn Stout from Candler School of Theology at Emory University, and today I am presenting my work in progress on Castro in the Sanctuary, faith-based diplomacy and the rhetoric of reconciliation in Cold War Cuba. So, my research questions. This research explores two central questions. First, how did Jesse Jackson's faith-based diplomacy succeed where traditional diplomacy failed? And second, what impact did Black liberation theology and Cuba's adaptive religious culture have on the transformation of Cuban church-state relations? Because apparently sometimes the answer to diplomatic deadlock is, or gridlock, is that you just have to try a little prayer. My sources draw from archival materials, Cuban Episcopal documents, existing scholarship, and firsthand testimonies from Reverend Noel Erskine, who just retired from Candler. And I am approaching this through what I call theology within narrative history, examining how religious rhetoric shaped diplomatic outcomes. I am a narrative historian who is currently in theology school. And so this is why all of my work has always been and has always been interdisciplinary. And so let me set the scene for you. Picture it, Sicily, 1922. Okay, all right. It's not Sicily. It's not 1922. That's a Golden Girls joke. But picture this. It's 1984, Havana. As President Fidel Castro entered Cary Methodist Church in his military uniform, the preacher gently reminded him to remove his hat and cigar. He seemed a bit out of practice with church decorum, and yeah, if we're honest, at times church teachings too. Now, how many of you have had to remind someone to put out their cigar in church? I take it that is not in the usher training manual, but that is what happened on this day in 1984. This extraordinary moment unfolded in June 84 when Castro, a self proclaimed atheist, attended his first worship service in 27 years. He had not stepped foot inside of a church in 27 years. And the invitation came from an unlikely diplomat, Reverend Jesse Jackson. To understand why this moment mattered, we need a bit of context. By 1984, US Cuban relations were frozen in diplomatic deadlock. Castro's popularity was waning due to economic hardships following the Mariel boat lift crisis. Meanwhile, Jesse Jackson was mounting his 1984 presidential campaign against Ronald Reagan, positioning himself as the alternative voice in foreign policy. So both Jackson and Castro desperately needed a win in 1984. So Jackson and Castro are key figures, but they weren't alone. Some of the biggest names in Black theology were present. James Cone, Benjamin Chavez, Jeremiah Wright, Carolyn Knight, Nolan Erskine. Imagine praise and worship with this guest list, all in the sanctuary on that day in 1984. Thankfully, we don't have to just imagine. Erskine documented two pivotal moments, one from the church itself, and I know these are long quotes, but they were so beautiful that I thought I should put them on the screen. So let's listen to Erskine's recap of that service. Many church leaders wept openly, declaring that the presence of the Cuban leader in church moved a situation of tension and doubt to one of hope for a closer relationship between church and revolution. But perhaps even more remarkable was what happened earlier in Castro's private library, where Erskine recalls, and can I tell you this second quote? I sent him a copy of the paper just to, see if I was tracking with the experience. And he put this in an email like 2 weeks ago. So this is like fresh. You guys are the first one to see this second quote. So he says, Jesse prayed in Castro's private library. I doubt whether there was any form of Christian prayer in that space before or after Jesse's prayer. The courage of our brother to call for prayer in that private space. Now, some of us get shy when the pastor asks us to turn to our neighbor. So imagine inviting an atheist to pray. Jesse called his mission in Cuba, and this was really part of a larger mission across Central America and the Caribbean. But he called this mission his moral offensive. And I actually love that phrase because it captures both the theological grounding and the strategic nature of what Jesse Jackson was doing. He was grounded in the biblical mandate from Micah 6:8, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. So Jesse is making the argument, or Jackson, I should say, is making the argument that God would be in Cuba in dialogue with Castro. But he also employed a Black liberation theology as a diplomatic tool, creating common ground with Castro's anti-colonial ideology. The results were tangible. Jackson Jackson secured the release of 48 prisoners, more than double the originally negotiated 22. In diplomatic terms, we call that way over delivering. So let's talk a little bit about the lasting impact. The impact extended far beyond that single church service or even that prisoner release. Jackson's prophetic witness and faith-based diplomacy transcended political boundaries in ways that traditional diplomacy could not. This encounter catalyzed a broader transformation in church-state relations, leading to the 1985 Catholic Bishop Conference in Cuba. This is huge because remember, Cuba was an atheist state, and in 1985, the year after Jackson's encounter, Fidel invites Catholic bishops, many of whom he had expelled from the country during the revolution, to come back for this national conference. Later in 1985, we also see the publishing of a work that had been in progress for a number of years, but it was finally published in 1985. It is a joint publication, Fidel and Religion. And this is by Fidel himself and Beto. Latin American studies scholar John Kirk captures the significance when he says, indeed, it was the 1984 visit of Black American pastor Jesse Jackson, which in many ways acted as a catalyst. All that has happened in 1985 concerning church-state relations has in some way been a spinoff of that meeting. And of course, I had to include the picture of them smoking cigars together because, it's Cuba. So Jackson's 1984 visit to Castro's Cuba highlighted the beneficial relationship between Black liberation theology and diplomacy, illustrating how faith can shape political discourse. In our current moment of international tensions and growing domestic divisions, this encounter offers insight into how Black liberation theology can promote international solidarity among marginalized communities. And it reminds us that sometimes the most unlikely figures, like a Black Baptist pastor or Black Baptist preacher, can break through the gridlock of feuding presidents. While Reagan and Castro were locked in a Cold War, it was Jackson's prophetic witness that reopened diplomatic channels and secured prisoner releases. I don't know, but perhaps in our own era of international standoffs, we might ask ourselves, who are today's unlikely peacemakers, and how are faith leaders still called to reconcile? Thank you for your attention. I am eager to hear your questions and feedback on this developing work. And also, if you have any other stories of cigar smoking revolutionaries going to church, I'm all ears for those too.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Stout. There may be a few in the Zoom room. I don't. You may not have you may not have to go far. All right. Next up, Christine Fox. Come on. You are up, my friend.
Hey, okay, good afternoon, y'all. I'll do a brief intro and then I'm going to switch my camera off and try to do my slideshow. So, everyone, my name is Christine Fox. I am a recent graduate of Memphis Theological Seminary. My degree is a MACM, Master of Arts in Christian Ministry, with a specialization in social justice. I also am going to be starting Dr. Johnson's new program, DMIN program at MTS this fall, and that is the program in religious communication and public theology. But saying all that, I feel a little crazy for getting into this because, well, my undergrad is in management information systems. And so my career up until fairly recently was in corporate IT. So I started as a programmer. I did business analysis, software design and analysis, and quality assurance work. And then during COVID, felt called to seminary, and I haven't looked back since. So this is, I think it was Dr. Letter that said earlier that hers is in the conversational stages. I don't even know if mine is in the conversational stages yet. I mean, this is all very new to me, but I'm really loving it. Have been totally nerding out. So y'all just bear with me. Like even the title, like I was looking at my title and my description or my abstract that I submitted, and I was like, whew, I don't know. But anyway, so I'm just going to go with it and kind of present what I have and where I think I might be headed, and y'all, just comment. So, okay, I'm going to try to share now. So, one moment. Okay, are y'all seeing that screen that says from ancient Israelites to American fascists?
Uh-huh.
Okay. All right, so this abstract and this idea kind of came to me as I was writing my final paper, final paper for my MACM degree in Christian Heritage 1. And the basis of that was kind of the suppression of the divine feminine in Christianity. So in that paper, I basically gave 3 examples of how that happened. And so I'm going to use 2 of those here. So the first example I gave was in the Genesis story, the what I referred to as a mistranslation, or maybe facetious translation of the Hebrew yeridu. So, and I'm just gonna kind of read this a little bit. So, okay, the key to the transformation of Genesis 1:26 through 27 from its original intent of conferring upon humans guardianship and nurture of creation is it changed from that to a text giving license to male human domination happens in the mistranslation of the Hebrew yeridu. The Christian Bible translates yeridu as coming from the root word rada in 2 cases in Hebrew scripture, which we're going to talk about. Okay, so rada means to have dominion or to subdue. However, there are multiple Hebrew scholars who maintain that the true root of yeridu is yarad, which means to lower oneself or to descend. So when we read in this way, we can interpret the passage in a new way and reconsider the verse in with the entirety where humanity is called to fecundity. So if we read Genesis 1:26 through 27 through this lens, we humans are free to serve and delight in creation as opposed to conquering it. So then, right, I go on to discuss how the word yarad is used, right? The root word yarad is used in every other instance of this word being used, right? So I'll just read here. It is striking to note, It is striking to note then that the root word rada, which signals dominion, is used only twice in the book of Genesis. And this is also right in Christian, right? Christian interpretations. Let me stress that too. So it is striking to note then that the root word rada, which signals dominion, is used only twice in the book of Genesis to form yuridu, in 126 and 128. It is the more humble yarad that forms the yuridu used throughout the rest of the book of Genesis. Okay, and then here I show this as I used this as one of the sources in my paper that I referenced. So this is from a blog, a rabbi's blog. And he says, as I look at all the modern Christian translations of the Bible, I find that without exception, every one of the translations follow the common teaching that the word yuridu comes from the root word rada, which means dominion or to subdue, rule over, to tread upon like a winepress. An old rabbi, however, once pointed out to me that the root word is really yarad. So 700 years after the birth of Christ, the Masoretes put I'm not going to pronounce this right, shirek, under the resh, making this the root word rada, which means to subdue. If they had only put the 2 dots, they would have the root word yarad, which means to come down or lower oneself. So the inspired word of God had no dots, and I believe that this old rabbi was correct in using the root word yarad to lower oneself rather than rada to rule over. So here we can see just one example of how a translation that is exclusive to Christianity and also exclusive to this block of text in Genesis where, right, we're setting up the whole idea of dominion, right? So my next slide is just showing kind of a contrast between the idea where we're elevating humanity above all else, or we are, here's a table where animals are being served, right? So anyway, my second example that I used was using the work of biblical scholar Elizabeth Schrader Polzer. This was published in the 2017 Harvard Theological Review. And this work is studying how we can attribute the Christological confession potentially to Mary Magdalene instead of St. Peter. So let's see. Sorry, I'm going to do some reading here. She demonstrates that the character of Martha was added to Papyrus 66, which is a near complete codex of the Gospel of John sometime in the 2nd century. She posits that this was done in order to hamper the text's subtle identification of Mary of Bethany with Mary Magdalene, and perhaps in order to ensure that John 11:27's crucial Christological confession would not be on her, Mary Magdalene's, lips. As she points out in an interview published in Christian Century magazine, Mary Magdalene is already an essential character in John's Gospel. She anoints Jesus. She's at the foot of the cross as he is dying. She goes alone to the empty tomb where Jesus appears to her first on Easter morning, and she gets the commission to go to the other disciples and announce that he has risen from the dead, giving her the Christological confession previously attributed to Martha makes her a threatening character. Right, and then she goes on to point out how Peter derives much of his authority from being the Christological confessor. Okay, I have the same slide twice. Right. So here is just another compare and contrast picture. So those are the 2 examples that I gave in my paper of how, right, scripture can be manipulated to make things, right, appear a certain way. And then part of my thought for where I'm going is just how Western civilization has been so shaped by Christianity that, right, we can't get away from these ideas, whether, we are believers in Christianity or buy into all of the Christian nationalism, right, that has kind of been just propagated and perpetrated upon our society, right? So then I just, since my paper, I have just started a few other areas of, inquiry, like the concept and communication of exile, right? And I have this whole, I will not read all this to you, but just how the Egyptian exile and exodus have been communicated versus what the archaeological and historical records tell us about them. And then also the Babylonian exile, which is that, right, that is Jeremiah's call. I examined that in Jeremiah's call to build, plant, and marry in 29:4-7, right? And there is a Hebrew scholar, Niels Peter Lemke, who contends that the Babylonian exile did not, in fact, create an exiled people or nation, as the biblical narrative seems to imply, but that it was actually quite the opposite, that the biblical authors created stories about the people of Israel living in forced exile as a way to explain why they and their people were not living in the promised land of their forefathers. This narrative includes a utopian dream for the future and a dream of return to the ancestral home. And so then I've just got some other, as I said, right, y'all can tell, this is very much like a very nebulous thing for me. But I have like just made notes throughout my seminary career and since graduating in December about other areas where I see like digging into the scripture more fully and also looking at other right, disciplinary areas can really shine light onto how white supremacy, white Christian nationalism, capitalism, right, all those evils have kind of seeped into our culture. So that is it for me.
All right. Thank you, Christine. That was good. So I am looking around now. We got time for some questions and comments. So, okay, those were clapping hands, I see. Okay, not a raised hand. So now we have an opportunity to dialogue a little bit. Again, great presentations, great works in progress. And I do encourage all three of you to continue to work and develop it into some sort of a final project, article, book, whatever, book chapter. We'd love to see it in print. We need to be able to cite you. So who's up? Who wants to go first? Not everybody at once. Michelle, go.
Dr. McNeil, I just love porch theology. I love the porch as threshold. I was all about that. And then when you said the porch is sacred space, I had a little shout over here. So I can't put together questions about it just yet. I just wanted to say my connection to it and how it just felt very powerful when you were saying. So I'm really interested in reading more about it and just seeing it all laid out. I'll look forward to your book.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Ironically, I have a huge meeting tomorrow morning with a publisher, and the idea of it is I've utilized, because I am a community organizer, and I am also a pastor. I realize that some of the principles from community organizing work really, really well for church growth and development. So I started to format it as a book using community organizing principles for church growth. So the Porch Theology is really an excerpt from chapter 7 of what I hope will turn out to be the book if they decide to publish it. But yeah, it's much longer, but we didn't have a whole lot of time. I could I don't want to bore you with that kind of stuff.
Marco, let me ask you, how would you differentiate? Because many folk who were listening to you present, from the people I saw, was nodding their heads and made comments in the comment section, because it resonated. And the reason why it may have resonated is because, um, it may have sounded like, hey, this familiar, this is right, you know. So how would you differentiate that though from Black theology, from womanist theology, from any liberationist theological paradigm, even what Cathryn was talking about with Jesse Jackson? What's the difference? What is your differential between your Porch theology and any other open-ended liberationist type of theology?
Yeah, I think the beautiful thing is that Porch theology is not particularly anything new. It's an amalgamation of a number of different theologies, and it just takes bits and pieces from it. But it is one that's really grounded in community. It is one that understands the relationship of neighbor, who is my neighbor. Somebody just said building a beloved community. Yeah, like it's literally grounded in community principles. Because if my neighbor falls or if my neighbor's house catches on fire, guess what?
Mm-hmm.
My house might catch on fire. So if I'm not looking out for my neighbor or trying to do, or at least, I mean, at least be in relationship
Mm-hmm.
with your neighbor, know who our neighbor, what our neighbor's name is. Now think about that in the church context. You got somebody that sit on your pew or on the other side of the church or go to a different service and you have no idea who they are, what their name is, what they do, who their kids is, who their granny is. You don't know any of that. But just imagine what it would look like if we were in relationship with each other, how much more powerful that can be, and then how that trickles into the community, because a stronger church builds a stronger community.
All right. Anybody else? Oh, I can keep going then. Cathryn, yeah, good presentation. Liberation theology. So talk a little bit about how you see, because you asked a provocative question at the end. Where are the faith leaders now? I can name some. I know what some of them are doing, but I don't think it's this. So, um, what would it take, in your estimation, for us to begin to see, even in foreign diplomatic situations, that theology and religious communication and frameworks can and are important in trying to do what is democracy, diplomacy, trying to do diplomacy. Getting
Um,
tired.
I think it takes boldness, and that's one of the things that is special about this moment in Jackson's history is that he was willing to deal with the backlash.
Mhm.
Let me be clear, the Reagan administration really did not want him to do this.
Mhm.
But when they saw that he was determined to do it anyway, and that he was in direct communications with the heads of states, then they tried to figure out a way to use it as some kind of diplomatic moment, right? But even in the newspaper articles and some of the archival materials from the diplomatic community, the traditional diplomatic community, they are highly dismissive and highly critical of Jackson. And so I think what it took for Jackson and what it will take for us is be willing to deal with the backlash. That's one, right? Be willing to deal with the backlash to say it is worth it. And then secondly, I loved how when Jackson went, he was able to both rebuke America and rebuke Cuba, right? He talked directly to Castro about the political prisoners who were being held, particularly the Christians who were being persecuted. And he also rebuked the US. So what does it take to hold space to say, um, I can be, I can critique both contexts, but still deal with you on the level of humanity, to recognize your humanity and to show Castro, or to remind Castro, that, like himself, Jesus was a revolutionary.
Hmm.
And so I think that is why he was able to get those bonds and get that closeness with Castro. And as you can see from one of the last pictures, he actually spoke at his memorial service in 2016, I think the year he died. It's because he always spoke to him as a man and his level of humanity, before he spoke to him as a statesman. It
Hmm.
was really about being bold enough to love him, to tell him he was wrong, but then also to say, but there is a way forward, and there is a way forward that circumvents the traditional diplomatic channels and the U.S. government, which was problematic and remains problematic.
So what I'm hearing then is not only, you know, must be bold, must be ready to take the backlash, must be engaging, you must critique like both sides. You are the moral center of this whole thing. But I also hear that that is a different religious foundation as well too. And I bring that up because there are people in state government now, with Secretary of State and a whole bunch of diplomats. I'm thinking about Huckabee right now as our ambassador to Israel. They're not doing that though. They have a whole different orientation. So now I want to put Dr. Stout and Dr. McNeil in conversation with each other. Uh, McNeil, do you think that listening to this presentation, was that an example? Could that be a case study of porch theology, using the service as the sacred place as porch, and sacred space as gathering, and this is literally a non-believer that's engaging into a worship service. So what do you think?
I absolutely agree.
So
Dr.
now
Letters,
we got the theory, got the case studies now. See what we
yeah, Dr. Letters said she had her shot. Well, let me tell you what mine was. When I saw Jeremiah Wright, James Cone, and Carolyn that night all on the screen at the same time,
right,
I
right,
was just like, I was happy. You could have stopped right then.
right.
But yes, they literally, and what we see most times in our actual community is people riding up and down the street, and then the porch happening there in our homes. But this makes it look like, or makes me think like, what does it look like when we take the porch to somebody,
Mhm.
like they did with him? And then imagine a revolutionary conversation that happened that changed the nation. So that's the question. Like, now we don't wait. And I think the church gets in trouble with this a whole lot. We focus on who's who's coming instead of remembering it was our mandate to go. Like the Great Commission said, go. It didn't say sit inside and wait to see who was coming. They modeled that and they took the porch to him. And thank you, Dr. Stout. But we'll figure this out. We'll figure out how to take the porch to people.
Well, and just to echo that briefly, the Ministry of Presence, right? And that's what I wrote down from Dr. McNeil's presentation. And that's what Jesse Jackson's moral offensive was about. It was about traveling in these Caribbean and Central American countries, saying, I will not talk to you through the problematic Reagan administration. I'm coming to you to talk to you directly, right?
Mhm.
And so it was about the ministry of presence in that moment. And so definitely not necessarily going to evangelize, but saying, I don't see you as this antichrist that you are being painted by the Reagan administration. I see you as something different, as something of value, as something, as someone who I can negotiate with, as someone who I can literally break bread with. And so I also think that's why a lot of people don't know about this moment, because he really pissed off the U.S. government. To have all of those great Black liberation theologists together in one place, traveling Central America and traveling the Caribbean, and you hear very little. Like I had to dig. I had to call people. Like, tell me what you remember, right? Like, there is not a whole lot written about this. You'll find a sentence or two here. I don't think there has been one full work dedicated to this, and you could dedicate this one full work to this 1984 project. So I think it's hidden for a reason. I think it's hidden because it may be a blueprint that some folks don't want us to have.
Well, Carl has just put a question in the chat, but I'm gonna hold that question because I want to bring Christine into this conversation as well too, because it goes to, I think, a little bit of Carl's question. Christine was talking about dominion and how it's been used in the words that's in the original Hebrew and the meaning, but this is what we talk about when we talk about religious communication or religious rhetoric. Theology, biblical interpretations, ethics, all of that has a discourse. They have a discourse attached to them. And if it's a discourse, that means a group of humans sat down and constructed it. And if that happens, when you got a discourse, it can be studied rhetorically. So what happens then when your major interpretation, your embedded interpretation of that word is dominion? Well, as Christine articulated, you see what happens because people begin to start having conversations about power and domination. And we find ourselves needing more ambassadors because a group of people think that they can go and take anybody's land or anybody's property whenever they think that they feel like it. So, Christine, I want to bring you into this conversation about, because at the end of your talk as well, you had several different points of inquiry that you could go. And one of them was this whole notion about, I think, about reframing or restructuring how we understand. But what would that take, though? What would that take? Is so embedded. We're so second creation story instead of first creation story. So what would it take?
I mean, I personally think a lot of it is education, and I think it's education like in a lot of different formats, right? I had been thinking of this as potentially like maybe a book because parallel to doing all this, I've also been doing a lot of my own personal trauma work, right? And I found a lot of through lines and there. So my thought for the book was writing about, I don't know, how what I see as means of oppression and stuff, and then how that you can apply that within your own life or just to a life experience. But I think it like more broadly needs to be disseminated, right? Like there are alternatives. The Bible itself is a book of literature, right? It's literature. That's how it was written. It wasn't written as like a, historical or reporting or anything. It's literature. So that to me means that we should be able to, really work with it and find, different translations and interpretations. Like, what do you think this means? And I guess I have found myself particularly interested in the Hebrew scripture because that's what Jesus believed, right? And I just don't feel like there's a lot of attention paid to other than what white Christian nationalists want to point out, right? as, go, this is what Jesus believes and this points to Jesus, right? But really, what did he believe? So anyway, that's kind of my thoughts. They were a little all over the place.
And then, of course, for the panel call is asking, how close are the lines of evangelism and colonialism within the parameters of Christian, what do you say, Christian diplomacy?
Yeah, I love that question. I don't get the sense that what Jesse Jackson was going to do was to evangelize. He did not go on his moral offensive to preach salvation. He went to denounce empire. But anytime you're denouncing empire, you're doing holy work. So this was not a direct evangelical crusade. And the fact that Castro actually went to church was a surprise to everyone. That comes out across really clear. I think the invitation was just made. No one expected him to accept it. He hadn't been to church in 27 years. And none of the other Caribbean or Central America figures, from what I can tell, actually attended a church service with him during his 1984 moral offensive. And so I do think there can be some blurring of the lines sometimes. I do think that has happened often in history. I don't see that as strongly in this situation. I think Jesse Jackson clearly went to denounce empire and to denounce American foreign policy.
Hmm. Let's see. Marco, you got a hand up.
Yeah, just really quickly, it's like as Dr. Stout was talking, I took a class with Dr. Jeremiah Wright when I was at Virginia Union, and I'm starting to vaguely remember this conversation a little bit, but if you are at all connected with his daughter Jerry, that may be another valuable resource just to kind of connect more of those dots, and hopefully you won't have to keep digging as far as you've dug.
So I did not know Dr. Jeremiah Wright was there until like 2 weeks ago. When I sent it to Noel Erskine, and he was like, "Oh, by the way, Jeremiah Wright was also there." I'm just like, like the more and more I dig, the better and better it gets. And so I am really anxious to try to like mine that vein. Yeah.
I don't think I have any. I don't know. I graduated from there so long ago, it feels like. But if I have any notes, I will find a way to get it to you.
All right, Carl.
Yes, excuse the camera. I think I wanted to provide some clarification of my question. It wasn't an insinuation that Jackson's presence was a sense of blurring those lines of colonialism and evangelism. My question was more so directed at this is done kind of antithetical to what we understand as Christian diplomacy within the parameters of American culture, right? And so, therefore, Jackson inserts himself kind of in a resistance to Christian diplomacy and the Reagan administration per se, right? And so my question is kind of in the context of as liberation theists, specifically Black liberation theists, um, is it always or should it always be kind of a resistance that goes against the, I would say, status quo of kind of the marring of the lines of Christian diplomacy that blurs the line of evangelism and colonialism?
I'm gonna have Dr. Johnson help me unpack this. Yes, period. Uh, but the second part of that would be so much of the Christian enterprise, unfortunately, has been about power and acquiring land and acquiring wealth. And actually, that's what Jackson went to critique. I didn't have a chance to get into it here, but one of the reasons why Castro kicked out the Catholics is because they owned so much land in Cuba, and he felt like the Catholics were working in connection with the US to kind of suppress the Cuban Revolution. So yes, what Jackson was doing, and this is why Jackson and Castro's relationship survived in 2, 3 decades, right? He was directly critiquing that strain of, I don't even like to call it Christianity, anti-Christianity, that is about power and land and domination, to say what James Cone has told us from the beginning, that Jesus is on the side of the oppressed. And in this relationship between the Cuba and the US, Cuba is the oppressed, so Jesus has to be on your side.
Jason, you had your hand up.
Yeah, question for Dr. McNeil. To preface this, I'm an outsider, so I'm an agnostic, lapsed Catholic, no background in theology. It's my morning, it's your evening. I also want to preface this because you're grounded your work in with referencing bowling alone. So I got to ask, where does social media, technology, smartphones, where does that fit into Porch theology if you're reclaiming community?
That is a great question, one that I have pondered for a little while, because I am buzzword. I am a millennial, so I did kind of grow up in this social media climactic age. But when I think about spaces like this, I think this is a porch. I think the porch is where we create a sacred moment, not only to hear each other, but to hear the divine in each other. And how we create that, I think, is, up to us. I am one that I am not fully in favor yet of creating this porch on social media platforms. However, I've had a number of people pushing me to have more discussions like this on TikTok. I have TikTok. I have no idea how to use it. I'm not interested in learning how to use it. I'm a sneakerhead, so I post tennis shoes. That's all I do. But I think the porch is where we create it. Now, I mean, if you could find and make Facebook or Instagram or whatever other variations are out there, I mean, if you can create that sacred space, then that's great. But, I feel like this intimate gathering right here, I feel like we on the porch. We just don't have sweet tea. Some of us got water and some of us got coffee and, whatever else we got. Carl might have a cigar or whatever you got. It's just what we created. And I love it. I don't usually talk about my work and things that I'm doing unless I feel like I'm in a safe space, and this feels like a safe space.
Yeah, people are trying to create those safe spaces. I see what Jessica just put in the chat, but those safe spaces online as well, and beginning to theorize, especially in comm studies. A lot of well, it's not really new media anymore, but under the banner of new media, a lot of people are beginning to theorize how people are coming together with support groups, prayer groups, those type of spaces and places. And especially, I know we kind of forget, and it's just been 5 years ago, but we did have a worldwide pandemic that forced us to find ways of community and begin to start thinking in those spaces and places. All right, we got a little bit more time. Anybody else? This has been good, y'all. Thank you so much. Oh my God, this has been great. This is what we wanted this to be. This is what we envision it to be. We hope that for the presenters, we hope that, getting you to present and to say out loud what's been in your head, what's been rolling around, what you've been thinking about, gave you that extra boost to go head on and, maybe finish the work or work on it a little bit more, give you some direction and where you want to go with it. We hope that for the listeners and the people who just jumped in and just wanted to hear what was going on, we hope that you heard something that was inspirational, challenging, something that made you think about your own work that you've done. And the other thing I hope that you picked up in this is that and when the proposals came in and when we looked at them and all of this, it actually worked the way that I thought it would. Did anybody know the diversity of thought and angles and the interdisciplinary flair of our work? I mean, so we have people representing all types of disciplines, interdisciplinary, people like me who I consider myself a transdisciplinarian. I don't really see boundaries in the disciplines, but because of what I study and how I study. But this was just fascinating. Somebody mentioned earlier we had a presentation from outside of the United States. It's one of the things that we're doing at the Journal of Communication and Religion that somebody named Johnson edits right now. We're looking and we are expanding our understanding of religion around the globe. We want to do that. We want to do that work. We got scholars who are doing fantastic work in that area. So this here served the purpose that we thought it would serve. Works in progress. And this is something that we're going to have. I think this is going to be a staple. We'll talk about it. Oh, yeah, Jay, you will get plenty of information about the journal and all of that. But this is something that we will talk about, but I really do believe that this is going to be a yearly thing, the works in progress. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we want to know your conferences, where you're presenting. We will be sending out emails for you to share what it is that you're doing, your work. You get a publication, you get a promotion. We want to shout you out. We want to have a weekly update of all of our members and what it is that we're doing. We want to try to be that porch. We want to be the community in which you can, reach out and engage. Oh yeah, Marco, you in, Doc. Don't worry. We got you. We want you to be engaged with each other, reach out to each other, exchange emails, all of that, and hit each other up on social media. It's one of the reasons why when you registered, we ask your social media, your preferred social media handle. We want to try to reach out to you and let you know what's going on, and then celebrate your work. To celebrate your work as well too, and let people know that people are working in this area. Going back to what Christine said earlier about education, one of the things that happens is that, well, at least what I run into when I meet people and when they're, wanting to do work, they don't think that they can do the work that their heart is leading them to do. They feel like, it will be tough, or nobody, is doing this and nobody is doing. No. You can get it done. We can frame it. You can get it done. And here are other people who have paved the way for us to get it done. When we started the center, we wanted this to be a place and a hub for interdisciplinary dialogue on religious communication or religion in some shape, form, or fashion. with as many of the barriers knocked down as possible. So not only do we have tenured professors, but we have independent scholars, we got community organizers, we got activists, we have people who are adjuncts, or people who are going through grad school, people who just finished one program and going into another program. I mean, the whole gamut. And this is what we think this should be. So thank you again for being a part of this. We are going to let you know about Religious Communication Association, the Journal of Communication and Religion. And another good journal, I think, especially if you're doing contemporary work and if you're doing it from a rhetorical focus, the Journal of Contemporary Rhetoric is a great journal to get some work out in as well, too. And I did get a couple of people who were interested in a centers panel or centers discussion. So we may do that as well. So if there is nothing else, or if there is something else, you got time to share.
Thank you for creating the porch for us today. To steal Dr. McNeil's terminology. Thank you for this space. This paper has really just been sitting in my files for like a year, maybe 2 years. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. So this gave me a reason to pull it out, to email Erskine, and to share it with you guys. So thank you for the porch.
Thank you. And thank you for participating and being a part. And until next time, I am going to end this right here.